phones were sitting exactly where they should have been. That's what made them wrong. When Melissa Casias' daughter walked into the house on June 26, 2025, there was nothing to suggest an emergency. No signs of forced entry. No obvious disturbance. The house looked lived in, normal. But on a table inside the home sat both of Melissa's cell phones. Not one, both. At first glance, that might not sound unusual, until you learn what investigators learned. The devices hadn't simply been left behind. They had been wiped. Factory reset. The digital equivalent of starting over from zero. Messages gone, contacts gone, photos gone, search history gone. The thousands of tiny details that make up a person's daily life erased in minutes. Yet the phones themselves remained. Not hidden, not discarded, not destroyed. Left in plain sight. For Melissa's daughter, it was the kind of detail that instantly feels wrong even before you know why. Because people might forget their phones or even lose it or accidentally break it. What they don't usually do is erase every trace of themselves and then leave both devices behind, especially when they never come home. At the time, there was no reason to believe those phones would become the center of everything that followed. Because only hours earlier, Melissa had been moving through what appeared to be a completely ordinary day. Yet by the end of the day, Melissa Casias would be gone. Welcome to the Hidden Chapters, uncovering the truth behind every crime. Melissa Casias wasn't a public figure. She wasn't someone who attracted attention. To family and friends, she was a mother balancing responsibilities, schedules, errands, and work. The sort of life built around routine. And on the morning of June 26th, routine was exactly what everyone saw. She drove her husband to Los Alamos National Laboratory. The facility is known around the world for its role in American scientific and national security history. Security is layered into everything. Access points, identification checks, restricted areas. Movement is documented. Information is protected. Melissa worked there as an administrative assistant, not a scientist, not a researcher. But she spent her working life inside the orbit of one of the country's most sensitive institutions. After dropping off her husband, she continued with the day. At one point, she delivered a sandwich to her daughter. It's an almost insignificant detail, the kind families forget within hours. Yet after a disappearance, those ordinary moments become evidence. Nothing about her actions suggested someone closing chapters. She was moving through the day the way people do when they expect tomorrow to arrive. Nothing publicly known from that morning suggests a woman preparing to vanish. Nothing suggests someone expecting never to return home. Then the timeline begins to separate into two versions. The part investigators can document, and the part they still can't explain. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough to leave behind questions that still haven't been answered. If you're enjoying this investigation, subscribe now. The detail we're about to cover would later become one of the most debated parts of the entire case. Earlier that day, Melissa sent an email to her supervisor. At the time, there was little reason to view it as anything unusual. It was one message among countless others exchanged during an ordinary workday. That changed after she disappeared. Family members would later point to the email as one of several details that seemed difficult to reconcile with the Melissa they knew. Investigators examined it. Family members examined it. The message became part of a timeline people were trying to understand after the fact. A detail viewed differently because of everything that came later. But before anyone realized Melissa was missing, before investigators began reconstructing Melissa's final hours, there was one last confirmed sighting. 2:18 p.m., State Road 518. But she wasn't in her car. She was walking, alone, on foot along the highway. Her vehicle was later found parked safely back at her house. Investigators would later return to that timestamp again and again. Everything before that moment could be placed somewhere on a timeline. Everything after it became far less certain. Investigators would later reconstruct that afternoon minute by minute. Witness statements, timelines, known movements. Every available detail examined for a clue about what happened after 2:18 p.m. None provided a clear answer. What remained was a woman seen walking alone along State Road 518, and a timeline that seemed to end there. Search operations began. Volunteers joined. Authorities followed leads. Areas were examined repeatedly. In missing person investigations, searches are rarely as simple as people imagine. Terrain must be mapped. Probability zones are created. Routes are evaluated. Search teams were looking for anything capable of extending the timeline. A vehicle, a personal item, a piece of clothing. Anything that could explain where Melissa went after she was last seen. But as days became weeks and weeks became months, investigators remained trapped by the same problem: the lack of evidence. The phones offered no immediate explanation. The final sighting offered no destination. The email offered no certainty. The case seemed suspended between known facts and missing information. And then nearly 11 months passed. In May 2026, a hiker entered an area of Carson National Forest. The discovery ended one search and began another. Human remains were discovered. Authorities responded. The area was examined. And eventually, the confirmation arrived. The remains belonged to Melissa Casias. For her family, the news ended one kind of uncertainty, but it immediately introduced another, because attention quickly shifted to where she had been found. According to reports, the location had previously been searched. That detail matters. Searches are documented, areas are recorded, resources are allocated carefully. So when a person is later found within territory that investigators believed had already been examined, difficult questions naturally follow. Were search teams simply unable to see what was there? Did environmental conditions affect visibility? Or was there another explanation entirely? Investigators have never publicly provided a simple answer to that question, and it wasn't the only question emerging from the scene. Near Melissa's remains, investigators found a handgun. On its own, that discovery would have become an important part of the investigation. But family members added another layer. They have publicly stated that Melissa did not own a handgun. For them, its presence raised immediate concerns. How did it get there? Who did it belong to? And what role, if any, did it play in the events leading to Melissa's death? Instead of clarifying the timeline, it complicated it. Investigators now had another piece of evidence that didn't fit neatly into the known facts. And like so many other details in the case, it seemed to raise more questions than it answered. As investigators continued examining Melissa's case, public attention began shifting toward a broader development. Her case became one of roughly 10 deaths and disappearances involving personnel connected to national security and federal laboratories that drew the attention of a U.S. House Oversight Committee inquiry. The inquiry does not establish a connection between the cases. It does not explain what happened to Melissa, and it does not suggest she was involved in espionage or classified activity. But its existence raises a larger question. Why did lawmakers believe these cases deserved a closer look? For all the theories, timelines, and investigations, the case keeps returning to the same image. 2 phones, sitting on a table, both erased, both left behind. The devices contain none of the conversations that once filled them, none of the photos, none of the plans. None of the context investigators often rely on when reconstructing a person's final days. Just silence. The last confirmed sighting remains fixed at 2:18 p.m. on State Road 518. The email remains a detail that family members continue to question. Questions remain about the handgun discovered near her remains. Questions remain about how she was found in an area that had reportedly been searched before. and questions remain about why a congressional inquiry eventually expanded interest in her case. Yet the detail investigators continue returning to wasn't found in the forest, long before Carson National Forest, long before congressional inquiries, long before search grids and evidence markers. A daughter walked into a quiet house and noticed something she couldn't explain. 2 phones, sitting on a table, exactly where they should have been. Because almost everything else can be placed somewhere on a timeline, the phones still resist one.
If this case stayed with you, you're not the only one. And if you're ready for the details most people miss, there's more waiting in the full Hidden Chapters playlist.